So what I want to talk about today is my on the Ukraine situation without sounding like a dick. Because I don't want to sound like an asshole. I don't want to kick somebody when they're down. That's not cool. And ultimately, I don't think this is Ukraine's fault. And I mean that in two different ways, obviously. Obviously, there's the surface level way of, Ukraine was invaded by Russia, right? So that's like the kind of surface level way that everybody understands. That's the way that everybody's really covering this thing. Like, Russia invaded Ukraine, so on and so forth, right? That's how people are covering the issue. But there's another side of it, and I don't mean another side like even playing defense to Russia, really. What I mean is that America has kind of used Ukraine as a chess piece, basically using Ukraine to exhaust Russia's resources to further, expanding NATO territory. So, there's both sides of it where Ukraine have been caught in this tug of war between, NATO and Russia, and wants its independence from Russia, and I think, still would want its independence from Europe, but, believes NATO and the West have been or should be a better ally to it. And, that's kind of where, where I see it from my analyzation. Now, my position is that we, as America, should not be involved. And again, I've felt this way since I was a teenager and the Iraq War and Afghanistan happened. I've been on the left, okay? And when George Bush and Dick Cheney invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, we were just going to continue invading countries and being overly involved in the rest of the world. The left was against that, okay? Democrats were protesting that. It was the left that was saying, we want America to be, non-interventionist. We don't think America should be as involved with the rest of the world. We need to start pulling away. We need to start focusing on us. And justifiably so, because every time we have, went into a region, went into a country on the of the people are being mistreated by their leadership or whatever the case is, the people are being ran by a dictator, by an authoritarian, we just destabilize the country, pay some mercenaries to take out the leader, and then no stable government ever comes to fruition after that. Iraq is a mess. Afghanistan, a mess. All the countries that we successfully defeated their leadership, all are in terrible conditions. You know what country isn't doing terribly? Do you know what country is actually a tourist destination? Do you know what country, where, what country's food we have that's very popular in America? Okay? Vietnam, who we threw endless amounts of bodies, money, resources to defeating their communist government, and were finally brought to the point where it was just so unpopular that our government was like, we just can't do it anymore. It's so unpopular through our citizens. It's so unpopular to the rest of the world. We serve no purpose there. We lost that war. And Vietnam, the evil communist who we were trying to defeat, had developed a very stable, peaceful nation where the people are happy, and it is a tourist destination now. Okay? So let's compare Vietnam to, I don't know, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran. Go down the list, right? What about the South American countries? Venezuela. What about, any country that we've successfully overthrown a dictator? It ends up being worse. I can't think of a country where we've overthrown a dictator and things have gotten better. In the 1970s, when the Shah decided to nationalize oil, he's going to nationalize the oil, we decided we can't be aligned with him anymore. He is a little communistic. This, making it to where the oil is for everybody. That's going to cut into our profits. So what did we do? We aligned ourselves with a fucking militant Islam extremist group that created a theocracy after that. But hey, they weren't communist, because for America, an America imperialist, there is no moral superiority. There never has been. So this whole nonsense of we're spreading freedom and democracy throughout the world, that's never been the reality. The people in a sovereign nation decide what they want, and they decide that by one of two ways: by either voting democratically for it or through violence. And if they do not like their leader enough, they will violently overthrow them. That is just what it is. We cannot be the moral arbitrators of the rest of the world in terms of what a leader should be for a different country, especially for countries that have existed thousands of years like we have. It makes no sense. And the only reason, we are in this position where we think that we have this duty to be the world's police is because we had the nukes post-World War II, and so did Russia. And so the two countries who had the nukes became the superpowers, and then it was it was the responsibility of us, and we had the power to go in and, tell countries what they should do, what they shouldn't do. Europe completely demilitarized themselves, so their entire defense was based on our military. They had they have no means of defending themselves. They really didn't develop nuclear weapons. I think France and the UK are the only ones who have a nuclear bomb, or nuclear capabilities, I guess I should say. So post-World War II, Europe completely stopped being self-sufficient, and they did it because we basically said, hey, there shouldn't be these multiple militaries in the world. Let's just have and we'll guard you, and it just was never going to be a long-term thing. George Washington, one of my favorite quotes of his is he said there should never be long-term alliances, because two sovereign nations, they're never going to be on the same page, even if they're temporarily on the same page. If we have different cultures, if we have different, societal beliefs, it's a matter of time before those things come to a head. And so if one country is too dependent on one, that just puts them in a very vulnerable situation. Good guy Dari, you want me to bully you like Trump bullied Zelensky, huh? I mean, you have no cards here, okay? You have no cards, okay? Listen to me. Oh, and I like how Trump did the Pauly Walnuts. I don't know if you're a Sopranos guy. He did the Pauly Walnuts at him. You listen here, you fuck. You listen to me, and you listen good. That's what he was doing. And yeah, the with and I'm I sign anything. But yeah, I don't think I don't think that show of force was necessary. I don't think that we had to be that hard on Zelensky in public. The whole J.D. Vance being there. J.D. Vance hasn't been at like one, public press conference since they've been elected. So the fact that he was there out of all things was a bit odd to me. But I think in a way, Zelensky knew that America is pulling away from wanting to be involved in Europe, and he needed to show Europe that. He needed to really put the fire under Europe's ass to really be like, hey, we can't depend on America anymore, so we really got to start, upping our military forces, our military spending. You know, I mean, everything's planned to a degree. I think that it was, on both sides. Trump wants to show his supporters that he's going to be tough on Ukraine. And then I think on Zelensky's side, he wanted to show his supporters that like he's not afraid to stand up to Trump and defend himself. So I think that strategy worked in both scenarios because Zelensky really, as Trump said, does not have a lot of cards to play. He is very limited in what he can do. So, he could have went the, super diplomatic route and just let Trump say whatever he wanted to say. But, there could have been consequences for that as well. Because if Russia is on the other side of this, bargain, of this, treaty, of this agreement, Russia's going to look for any weakness. So if Zelensky's showing any weakness, if he's already conceding things, then it's going to be easier for Russia to take those concessions. So it is a tough thing to navigate, and I guess all we can do now is just try to find the best middle ground and then be like, look, that's it. We can't be involved in it. And for all the people who are beating their chest about, like, how could America let this happen? How could we, let Russia invade Ukraine and just take Ukraine and not do anything about it? I mean, how much more do you want us to do at this point? I mean, because it's only going to escalate between America and Russia, and every American who's super pro continuing our funding of Ukraine really needs to ask themselves, where is the line for you? Because if we continue doing that, there is no scenario where we don't end up in direct war with Russia. So do you want your kids on the ground fighting Russians? Do you want your kids dying for Ukraine? Yeah, I mean was definitely going to ask that, and Zelensky should have seen that coming because the American, people in the American media have definitely been pointing that out for some time of him coming here without like a president, world leader. I think it's a fair criticism. I understand both sides of it because, as Zelensky says, he wants to be dressed like the people. If the people can't dress in suits because they're in constant distress from this war, then maybe he shouldn't either. So, I mean, again, I have respect for that. I think, there's a lot of spirit in Zelensky. There's a lot of things that are commendable about him. And I don't wish them any ill will, but I just don't want Americans involved. Ukraine has more in common culturally with Russia. They have more in common with Russia than they do with the rest of Europe. They were Russia. And I'm not saying that to dismiss Ukrainians having sovereignty. But at a certain point, you have to step back and just have a real conversation and say, what is the best outcome of this? What is the best scenario? And what's the most realistic scenario? Because unless that are blue and yellow flags constantly, that are beating their chest, they got the blue and yellow flags in their profile pictures, are you willing to sacrifice your children for Ukraine? You need to ask yourself that, because that's where this leads if this continues. This leads to nuclear war. This to the destruction of humanity. It just is what it is, and it sounds like a sick and cynical calculation to make, to say, is Ukraine worth nuclear war? But you have to make those calculations, especially if you're a world leader. It would be irresponsible not to make that calculation. So, we've tried as much soft intervention, and I say soft, very, with strong quotation marks, because giving a country weapons to attack another country, I mean, if you're Russia, at what point are you like, well, it's what difference would this be of Americans just attacking us? Using American weapons, they're using resources from America to attack us. So, I mean, if I was Russia, I would honestly take that as, an attack from America directly. But I think, Putin knows that there's, these proxy wars and things like that. But it's, there's a line, cutoff point. And, you just have to, Americans just have to ask themselves, where is your cutoff point? We should have never been involved in this in the first place. And other side is if you invade another country and then slap the nuclear cards on the table and everyone backs off, that could lead to nuclear in the future itself. Yeah, I mean, it's again, there should be some rule of law in terms of like national or international politics. But, the problem is, it's like I remember when I was a teenager and I would always hear people say George Bush and Dick Cheney are war criminals. And I'd be like, well, if they're war criminals, that means they'll probably get arrested soon, right? Someone's going to come arrest them. I realized we're the world police. America's the world police. The world police work for our presidents. Then who's going to arrest them? Who's going to put our leaders in check if our leaders are the one in charge of the world military and the world order? So it's just, there never was true international law. There's no international police. We're the international police. So there isn't really something to put, things in balance. And I say this almost of a defense for these other countries, almost as a sympathy for them. Because, again, the majority of the world, especially the Western world, has relied on America for its protection. So they stopped really building up their militaries. They stopped the ability to defend themselves because they just always expected America to come save the day. And that was always a silly gamble. That was, I mean, especially coming from countries who are way older than America. The fact that they would, so carelessly deal just seems very very silly to me. But here we are, and Russia is more of a problem for Europe than it is us. Russia has never attacked America. I hate to be blunt about it. I hate to be callous about it, and I'm not saying be allies with Russia. I'm not saying we should hold hands with Russia. But we have to have an honest conversation about the topic. And we have to say, what is the outcome for not only the world, but especially our politicians and our leaders really ultimately have to say, what is the best outcome for America? I'm not against us being a, more isolationist country. I'm not against us being like a Sweden. I don't know if it's Sweden or Switzerland, something like that, where it's just we are what we are and we don't engage. We are engaged with. So it's not necessarily for the desire to freeload. It's more about the history. UK, France, or Germany gets more army. Others get suspicious because historically that means there's going to be a war soon. No, I don't disagree with that. And yeah, I mean, Europe has always been at war with each other since its existence. The Germans, the French, the British, the Italians, they've always been at war with each other, but they share such a small, not even a real continent. I don't know why we a continent, because Europe really isn't a continent. It's like the size of like 5 U.S. states. So they've always been fighting over that land individually. Forget even Russia being involved in it. But they have to decide if their alliance with themselves is worth joining forces and creating an actual European military instead of just individual militaries for themselves. They have to decide that. But I think the calculation has been made by Americans, again, even before the Trump administration. Really post the Iraq war and Afghanistan, Americans have been growing sicker and sicker of our involvement in the rest of the world. This was going to happen regardless of Trump. It's been a slow burn, but it's the reason why, under Biden we pulled out of Afghanistan. Trump started that agreement, but Biden honored it. And Biden did that because he knew the American people at large, again, don't want to have this military involvement with the rest of the world. And it's not to say that there's no consequences of that. I'm not delusional where I think that us pulling away from the rest of the world and not being the world's police anymore would be free of consequences. I'm sure there were. I'm sure, and China would both gain, seize more control in their respectful regions. But, if China has never attacked us directly, if Russia has never attacked us directly, then why the antagonization? That to me is like, it seems just ill-founded, and it seems silly, and it seems like we're playing with fire for the most part. We should form alliances, with countries who just don't want to be in conflict with us, and regardless of who they're in conflict with outside of us, if we can share interests, let's share interests. But we can't sit here and play like the moral superiority thing. That is what I can't get down with. I can't get down with us being like, oh, well, Putin's a dictator, so we're not going to be in an alliance with him. Saudi Arabia has a monarchy, okay? And they've been one of our biggest allies for years. So there's just no consistency in the standards we set for the world leaders that we're against. Saudi Arabia is some of the worst human rights violators, in the world. And then you have Israel. How long has Netanyahu been in power? Netanyahu's been in power maybe even longer than Putin has, but we don't call him leader. And some of his political rivals have mysteriously died of weird causes and, weird deaths. So it's like we pick and choose who the villains are, even though some of the heroes and some of the villains share the same traits. And really what it's all about is capital. It's all about who our businessmen can gain the most resources and money from. You can't really, it's hard to do that in a communist country, and that's why we became against Iran when the Shah nationalized oil or wanted to nationalize oil. Because how can our oil businesses, companies, profit when somebody is nationalizing or socializing their oil? You can't profit off of that. It becomes a right, a human right for the people who live in that country. It's not a profit-driven business anymore. And that's always how we've made our decisions and who we've villainized. It's no different than why we villainized Vietnam, because we knew that they were going communist, and we can't have that. We knew that Cuba was going communist. A lot of South American countries were going communist. And we can't make money off of communist societies, because communist societies are not driven by profit. And that's always, where we've made our decisions. So when you see that through line, even if you don't agree with communism, you have to ask yourself, if the people of those countries do, and to a point they did, because the people lead revolutions to bring to those countries. It was the citizens of those countries who made their decision. So even if we, which I'm not saying me, but even if we as a country culturally are against communism, it's not for us to decide if that's right or wrong for a separate sovereign nation. Just like some sovereign nations are theocracies, some are monarchies. It's up to the people to decide that. And if the people don't want that, and if they don't want it hard enough, they're going to have a violent revolution again, just like they've done 1,000,000 times before. And they're going to overthrow that government and replace it. You know, you're only stuck with a dictator that you don't like until you don't like them enough that you get rid of them. The people always outnumber the leaders. The people always outnumber the ones in power. And every time the people realize that, they seize the power back. And I do feel like America is on its way to that. I do feel like a lot of people that come from the right and come from the left see things now for what they are. They understand, like, a lot of the MAGA supporters are like, you know, hey, we like Social Security, we like Medicare, we like Medicaid. A lot of them are tired. A lot of them are veterans that survive on these programs. A lot of veterans were government employees, lost their jobs to Elon Musk raping and pillaging the government. So a lot of the MAGA supporters are turning on them now, and you're seeing like these coalitions forming between people who've historically been Trump supporters or been on the left, and just like being like, we have to get the money out of politics here. We have to get the rich people out of the government, because all they do is pass laws that benefit them. They are not passing any laws that benefit the greater citizenry of the country. And again, this all comes back to Ukraine, right? This comes back to Israel. Doing these things out of the kindness of our hearts. We're doing these things because we as a country have an agenda to further our influence and really further collect resources. And that's one thing about Trump that I have to say. He's at least out in the open with this. He's not, you know, Barack Obama. He's not Bill Clinton, you know, or, you know, George Bush or any of these, like, you know, politicians of the older generations that would really put on that mask of, we're doing this as a moral thing. We're doing this because we're looking at the little guy. We're looking out for the little country that is being bullied by another country. Trump's just like, look, we're making a deal. If you want us to support you, we want your resources. He's just putting that in the public eye. Now, again, that was always what was going on anyway. I want to be clear. This was always what was happening. When we were giving money and resources to African countries, we were always getting something in return. We were never doing this out of the kindness of our hearts. And any policy with foreign intervention was never some humanitarian thing. There was always somebody getting a cut. There's always some private contractor getting a piece of land, getting a resource with us giving, you know, AIDS medicine or anything like that. So I think we have to come to this understanding, and now that we know this, we have to decide, what do we actually want to do? Do we want to continue giving endless money and resources to other countries, especially when our citizens don't have things like other countries have? And that's what kills me the most, is all these European countries have universal health care. They have housing programs. They have, you know, way more stable social safety nets. We continue taking care of their military. We continue really supporting their pharmaceutical industry, because Americans pay the most for medicine because our government does not negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies on our behalf. Any country that has universal health care, the government is negotiating on the behalf of the citizens to get the best price of the drug, of the cancer drug, of whatever medication. That's not what our government does. Our government is, you know, just like, hey, you know, charge whatever you want for medicine, and, you know, survival of the fittest. I think what defines my political ideology when it comes to like foreign intervention is that I'm the opposite of a neocon. I think a neoconservative, they are socialist basically for the rest of the world. They're fine with the rest of the world, you know, having endless resources and money from us and, you know, military aid, but they're not okay with that for their own American citizens. Where me, I'm socialist when it comes to our citizens. I want our citizens to have all these benefits, have all these programs, and I'm basically like a big libertarian for the rest of the world. The rest of the world, it's up to them. If you want to be a country, you have to be able to support yourself as an independent country. You can't call yourself a sovereign nation. It can't be sovereign. So you have to be able to support yourself financially and support yourself militarily. It doesn't mean you can't have alliances. It doesn't mean you can't form coalitions with other countries. But, if you look at the world before World War II, Germany, had its own military. Italy had its own military. England had its own military. France had its own military. And they basically either formed alliances or they didn't. But at the end of the day, when shit went down, they would defend themselves or try to. So it's just, I ask myself that. That's what I say is, if a country can't support itself on its own, does it deserve to be a country? If, Ukraine is depending on the West or the rest of Europe to exist, then why shouldn't it be swallowed up by another European country who's financially supporting it? I don't know. Maybe that's callous for me to say, but that's just how I see it. All right, I'm taking a tea break.